Good evening. I'm Greer McGeary, President of Seahorse Victoria, and my guest tonight is Elise Lonsdale, who has a very interesting story to tell about her life. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you for having me, Greer.
Progress of a story, of course, is starting with do you call it an obvious disability for you?
Yes, I was born legally blind. I am legally blind. I have less than 10% vision. I have sight in one eye because my left eye is artificial, caused by an expulsive hemorrhage during a corneal graft operation in 1984. It's a congenital issue. It's glaucoma, and they believe that glaucoma couldn't appear in people so young back in 1965, but it does, and it's caused by it's a defective gene, and it's a dominant gene. The resulting vision I've now got was I had cataract in this eye when I was first born, so I actually had no sight in my right eye, but sight in my left eye. Now it's the other way around. They needled the cataract. They didn't do intraocular lens implants back then. So as a result, they made a hole in the cataract, which gives me a displaced pupil and leaves me with no lens, so I can't accommodate for reading print off paper so easily and seeing you distance and 30 degrees field of view. In
those early years of growing up, you've obviously had it right through, so you've learnt to sort of adapt from it. So how did your parents cope with it?
Well, my mother was vision impaired, so I was in some respects privileged enough to be born into a blind family. 2 aunties, a cousin who came along 4 years after I did, and my own mother, and my grandfather, Clary Ranger. He had the same problem as well, same defective gene.
That really gives you an advantage in the sense that your family knows how to cope with that vision impairment, and then makes it easier for you to go to school and study and things like that. So what was your primary schooling like?
Primary school was, well, actually, it starts a little bit earlier than primary school. Some of the friends whom I still have today I met in the nursery at RVIB, Royal Victorian Institute for the Blind School, which is now Vision Australia, and Vision Australia sadly has shut down that school, but that's another story. So some of the friends I've had since I was 3 years old. It was a boarding school, and it didn't matter back in those days whether you lived across the other side of town, in a regional area, or even just over the road. You were expected to board. Only very few parents had the privilege or the ability to have their children as day students. Sadly, I wasn't one of them. But it gave us sort of made it a different upbringing from my sister. You know, I've got a very different upbringing and therefore a different outlook on life than, say, my sister does. However, that said, we're closer now as adults, and we live independent but very connected lives.
Fortunately, with my children, we haven't had to sort of deal with that extra burden of worrying about what other people think while trying to, make sure that our children had the best possible education. And so, were you somebody who was, say, academic?
Not then. Years? Actual fact, my parents and my family education sadly was not on the high list of priorities. School was something you did because you did. It was legal to send people to school. Education sadly wasn't what I believe it should be, which is why I work in a school as well as my own business, but I work in a school 1 day a week in an effort to give blind and low vision students a far better deal than what I got. It wasn't pleasant. There was nothing pleasant for me about going to boarding school, and people of my ilk would agree with me. People from my age group would agree with me. People who came through perhaps in the 1980s or even decades prior would have a different view. But when we came through in the 60s and 70s, it was not an experience I would want to see my children go through. I don't have any children. The education standard was a little different from that of regular students.
So did that carry on into secondary school?
Well, yes. I went to secondary school and I started at year 8, I think it was, because I was sort of doing a combination grade 6, grade 7 type thing at school. And I went to what we colloquially referred to as cited school, back in the day, when integration in the early 80s, I left RVIB at the end of 1980, was just a mere social experiment. You know, I see the kids coming through now, and they're getting, they're getting visiting teachers, teachers' aides. We have a lot of technology that enables children these days that are either funded through the public school system or whatever private school they're in. So they've got, really, the best of computers they can get. But we'll get to that. But what I'm saying is it was not like that for us. We were, I used to wear thick jam jar glasses. So we were called Four Eyes.
Yeah.
We were different because we had a disability.
You're going through school. So at the cited school, as it were you subject to sort of bullying or any of that sort of?
I was. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I despise bullying now. It doesn't matter whether it's from children or adults. I don't believe in any authoritarian or any bullying whatsoever. Yeah. I remember being slapped on the back of the head at the bus stop because the kid thought I couldn't see him coming. We had to put in an official complaint about that.
Yeah.
I got my glasses broken once by some bully kid on the way home. Yeah. So it was very different. I made some friends, but I don't have any of my sighted school friends anymore.
You've got through school, and now what happens when you leave school?
I went to the rehab at the RVIB to try and learn how to use switchboard, to do some Braille. So I did a little bit of grade 1. I can read a little bit of what we call grade 1 Braille. And then I actually got a job selling kitchens at Nebel Kitchens. It was my first job, but that didn't last long. You had to go door to door with a group of people, and that didn't really go down well, so I didn't last there. I then went to their Assist program at RVIB again, and I wound up working in the stores at what was the Australian distributor of Sansui Hi-Fi back in those days. Yeah. They went out of business. Then I got a job in a sign factory. I did that because my mother was unwell and she died of cancer in 1988. So I had to support the family, and I never liked that job. And the best day of my life in that job was the day I got retrenched. Geez, that was a good day.
Yeah, so it's been, obviously those early years are really challenged. So what was your social life like?
Social life was, I used to do ham radio when I was younger. I belonged to some ham radio clubs, a blindness club we had at Kooyong at the time, and the Eastern Mountain District Radio Club. I got into the CB radio for a bit when I failed the radio exam, but that's another story I intend to fix. But suffice it to say, I made friends off the CB and just made friends as I went through life. I made some other friends in the blindness community. When after I got retrenched, I thought, time to go to computers. I have to have a job or a career in computing. So I made some friends there. And look, social life, you're automatically... Your universe is smaller when you've got a vision impairment. Yeah. So your whole world's smaller. And it really wasn't until after I was married and stuff that I got into things like Toastmasters that my friendship circle has actually gotten larger. Yeah. Acquaintances, friendships, and business people, etc.
You mentioned you got married.
Yes, I
did.
You're
no longer married?
No longer married, no.
Yeah. Now we move into, when did you first sort of really understand that you felt differently from?
Look, all through my life, and I was sort of experimenting doing things before I got married. But it was really the entrance of the internet where I could go and do my own independent research to find out about these feelings. And being transgender, you tend to try and be as male as you can for a while to prove that you're not, and then all of a sudden you get maybe sprung wearing the opposite clothing, that sort of stuff. And I didn't know how far it would go originally. I knew something was wrong. I knew there was a guy called Dr. Darren Russell who used to work at the Carlton Clinic, who went to work at the Crown Market Clinic, and I met him through one of these clubs. It wasn't Seahorse, it was another one, Chameleon it was called, and he could tell that I was heading for a change, to cut a long story short. So I went to see him and started on hormone treatment. And then as I was separating, I went formally into the gender clinic, as it was at the time, with Trudy and Finton Hart.
Yeah,
whom we've interviewed Finton recently.
it sounds a very similar path to me,
Yeah.
except we were married for much longer and we had kids and so on and so forth. But that feeling of having, I was in a position where I was, my full adult height at 16, so I was very physically strong and fit and loved my athletics, but always in the background was this
there's something not right in the background.
Something's not there. And
I used to, when I was at cited school, I used to hang around with the girls more than the boys.
Been living full time for quite some time. How did that impact on you with both having vision impairment and transition?
Look, I probably tried to do a little bit too much at the beginning because I was also wanting to move away from just doing help desk. I was doing help desk jobs back at the end of the 1990s, and I didn't really want to do just help desk, not wanting to take anything away from people who do it now. I think they do a great job, but I didn't want all the systems administrators' problems to become my problem, trying to explain stuff to the user base. So I went to be a web designer for a while, which tested my vision. And there was also the transition as well, because I was living full-time female for several years before I went onto the gender program. I'm not sure whether it was true or not, but there was a story getting around that they weren't really big on assisting people back in those days who were still married or in a relationship. Not sure how that works these days. I'm sure times have changed. Yeah. I was very taken by the interview you did recently with Dr. Finton Hart. Yes. There was Trudy, and I remember the first day I met Trudy, she said to me, "I don't think you're suffering transgenderism at all." And I went, "I don't think I'm suffering at all in any way, thank you very much." And that set the stage, because I knew so many people through the various organisations and that had met Trudy, so I was prepared, because Trudy was one of these people who you had to show strength to from the get-go.
That's right.
If you didn't, you'd be sunk. Yeah. And I was not intending to be sunk. And when I remember talking to Trudy about this very thing, nearing the end of the whole thing, and because she said, "Look, this transgender stuff, you've got to sell it." That was her philosophy, and I agree with that. Yeah. But I said to her on my last appointment, "Trudy, I came to you for a reason, and that reason was to have something done, to have something fixed, to have something changed. You've done that now, you and your colleagues. Yeah. So I'd like to now walk away and say thank you for a job well done."
Well, that's good, yeah, because she did have a reputation. I did originally go and see Trudy, but as things progressed, I didn't really see her that often. Living full time and gone through the clinic and sort of basically it's a procedure in a sense.
It was a procedure, but it was also an adventure. It was cool. I made a movie of myself just before I went into surgery. I just held the camera out at arm's length and did a commentary before I went into surgery. Back at the was it the Masada Hospital?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was there and I had a ball. It was great fun. It was, I had my stereo under the bed when I came out. I remember I had because it was before, really good mobile phones that are really accessible. So I had a week off, work, lying in the bed, and it was great fun talking to the staff.
You've had your surgery now.
Yep. You
talked about mobile phones and technology. So the combination I'm looking at here is that on what made you go and join Toastmasters?
I was living with a friend of mine who is no longer somebody I see, and probably shouldn't have done that move, but it would have been nice to have come out of hospital and have someone to go home to, which I did. It was after the marriage. But she was one of these people who was very self-centered, and she goes, and I talked about Toastmasters, I'd heard about it. She said, "Why don't you go and join Toastmasters? I need the house to myself." So I'd already been once to the Ringwood Club, and then I moved to live with this friend of mine in Chadstone. And the nearest clubs, there were two clubs. There was Chadstone and Mount Waverley. So I picked Mount Waverley because for me it was the easiest one to get to. I could walk up Huntingdale Road and grab the train along one stop.
Right. Yeah.
And she didn't like it. because I got good at it. So I guess in some reasons I checked out Toastmasters for the wrong reasons, but I became very good at it. I enjoyed my time at Glen Waverley. I was there for about 8 years before I moved to Perth and then on to New Zealand. So I've done those long distance moves. Yeah. I had a ball at Glen Waverley. It was an awesome club, high standards, and I met a lot of lovely people through there.
I joined Toastmasters as an exercise in sort of being this side of my life as I was sort of making changes. Thoroughly enjoyed it. So 15 years on, I'm still a member.
Yeah.
Because I've made some very good friends.
You do, don't you?
In a broad range of things, particularly outside the club. But you mentioned there about moving to Perth and then to New Zealand. What
caused that? Well, I was a web designer and I was getting a little bit tired of this. So a friend of mine whom I met through the Cisco Academy for the Vision Impaired, we taught Cisco networking to blind and low vision students because it can be seen as a job, and especially now since COVID, but this was way before COVID, this is in the 2000s, where vision impaired people have mobility issues getting to work. So why can't they work on servers and switches and routers and that sort of stuff remotely? That was the philosophy by Dr. Ian Murray, or now Professor Ian Murray. He was doing his PhD at the time, and the Cisco Academy for the Vision Impaired was his project. I got in with a guy called Greg, he's very big in producing DAISY audio books, which is a digital accessibility information system for setting up books for people who are blind and low vision to read audio or braille books. He came over from America to work in Perth. Now, Cisco Academy for the Vision Impaired, or CAVI, was run from Perth. And I was getting to Melbourne at this point. And he sort of headhunted me a bit, and I went through a formal interview process. I got the job and I went over to Perth to be an audio book producer, or what's now often referred to as an alternative format producer. And then I stayed in Perth for 16 months. I loved every moment of Perth. But I also wanted to do what I do now, which is access technology, which is teaching blind and low vision people how to use their computers with text-to-speech and braille, and also screen magnification. And that includes iPhones. So a job came up in Palmerston North, New Zealand, where a friend of mine lived. So I went there.
Very interesting life you've had so far. It demonstrates that you're able to really develop a strong sense of yourself as a person.
Yes.
Is that partly through finally transitioning to say, I'm now fully open about myself?
I'm fully open about who I am. I can be who I am. Because a friend of mine who was a doctor in America, she said to me, "You changed your identity. That must be a pretty big move." I never really thought of it like that until Jackie mentioned it, So it is. And that identity now is a better one than the one I had prior to the transition, I believe. And I can be who I am. So I went to New Zealand. I had a ball in New Zealand, got very homesick. But yeah, I cut my teeth on helping people with their technology there. And then I was able to come back home, and I had a 1-year contract with Vision Australia here, and then I went into my own private practice.
What style of business are you currently doing?
The target audience is people who are on the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. We find a lot of people are having difficulty with the larger providers, long wait lists, not getting the service that they thought they would get. See, a lot of the things I do is I've got lived experience. So I'm vision impaired, and I used to get this when I worked for the Blind Foundation in New Zealand, and even for that year at Vision Australia. People's family members, spouses, wives, husbands would say, "Oh, Elise, I'm so glad you're here, because if you can do it, Bob can do it. If you can do it, my wife can do it." So it's better than some sighted person in some respects who's only understands vision impairment from an academic point of view, doing it, because I've got lived experience. When
you mentioned that leaving school, you didn't do that well, but you clearly showed that you had the intelligence to be able to nut all this out.
Yep. I've done, courses, and I did the Cisco Academy for the Vision Impaired course, a number of courses. I was actually also one of their senior instructors for a couple of years. So I was instructorized, and I helped to, like what we do in Toastmasters, mentor people.
Yeah.
And one of my very dear friends from New Zealand, Kylie, I mentored her. She became an instructor. Yeah. She's very good at what she does. She's very good with people. And I still work with Kylie over the link now, as she writes assists me to write a lot of my NDIS report.
Besides sort of having a business which deals with technology for the vision impaired, like your iPhone, as you're saying, and web readers and things like that, are you sort of still or actively involved in sort of beyond the business side, like on boards or anything like that?
Not at the moment, although I had thought about going on the boards of one of these organisations. Assuming I don't get thrown off it. I have been known to do a little bit of moving and shaking. One of the jobs I've got now is working for that school on a Friday at the Statewide Vision Resource Centre. And it's just a lovely job. People, all the staff there are there for the one reason, and that's to assist our students to have access to the written word. I'm a so big believer in that, because when I was at school, we were denied access to Braille because it was deemed that, you've got a little bit of vision, you can read large print. Well, no, when you read large print, you only see a few letters at a time, and it can affect the language centres of the brain, so you don't have that literacy that you would otherwise have if you were reading as a sighted person would, or as a Braille reader would, because a Braille reader can actually scan ahead, and Braille actually uses, believe it or not, even though it's a tactile medium, a lot of the same language centres in the brain as does standard text.
Well, you would sort of think logic would sort of suggest that that should be the case, because whether you're using your eyes or your fingers to sort of run over words, that's what you do with your eyes.
It triggers the same language centres.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And what sort of age group at the school are you mainly working with?
Year 10s, year 4s to year 10s.
Sort of that
so
late primary, early secondary
late
school.
Primary, early secondary. So once they go into year 11, they're usually got quite a lot on their plate. So we have something like about 5 or 6 groups of students. So we'll have them come in on a Friday. So yesterday, for example, was Group C, and that had a certain range of children in it. Next week we'll be doing Group B, and that'll have another group of people in it. We've had up to 11 students in one hit. So I'll do these sessions for about 45 to 50 minutes with each student. So they rotate. All our students get at least one tech session, and a tech session with me or a tech session with one of my other colleagues. There's about 3 tech teachers. They also do a little bit of PE, play goalball or whatever. And then they usually also have a session of cooking, which is adaptive daily living, and a session of what we call O&M, or orientation and mobility.
So comparing when you were going to school and to the kids that are now going basically the same age range when you were at school, what are the big differences you're seeing in their capacities to grow and develop as a
I think their capacities and opportunities are greater now, definitely, because we were in the institutional environment. In actual fact, if anything, they've probably gone too far the other way. It's all about integration into regular school. But there's a belief among a number of us that you do need to have some sort of place that people can go to basically, for want of a better expression, learn how to be blind. Learn those blindness skills, learn O&M, learn how to read Braille, which is a code. Braille's not a language, it's a code. To learn how to use the computers with speech or magnification, because we are using we're talking about the expanded core curriculum here. So it sits over and above the standard school curriculum.
I know just from when I was at primary school and all these thoughts are running around my brain about where I'm at as a person, particularly as a teenager, that I still go on and have a sort of a inverted commas normal life, and I don't ever regret those paths, because they're the relationships you develop. But at the same time, once I finally decided to deal with this side of my life, I feel so much more whole as a person.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
I do too. Life is better.
Yeah. And do you find, like the students or adults relate to you better because you're more comfortable with yourself?
Oh, without a doubt. Well, of course, I wasn't doing any of this prior to my transition, so it's difficult to say. But I think people in general relate to me better.
Where do you see yourself going over the next few years?
I'd like to continue doing both the jobs I've got over the next few years because I love what I do and I do what I love. And I'd like to build my business more, and I've got some ideas. I've actually started to move a little bit into what we call audio description consulting. I'm working with a lady who does audio description of main shows, and often she'll ask me to consult. We're actually doing some consulting recently with dance. Now, dance is something traditionally that's a very visual medium.
Yeah.
And yet this lady, Nilgan, wanted to find out how well it would go if she were able to audio describe some of these fast and very, very sophisticated movements. So I was involved in some of that. We went to see the show live when it was all complete, and it was a great show.
Elise, thank you for the conversation today.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that's really you bring out is that not just resilience, but taking the courage to just be yourself, whether transitioning and with the vision impaired, you demonstrate that you can have a wonderful life.
It is great. And I often say to people now, my life is better, not just after the transition, but even this side of New Zealand, because before I went to New Zealand, there was no NDIS. That came in about the time I was leaving, and it took a long time to roll out. Because not only am I a contributor to the NDIS through my work, I'm also a participant in the NDIS. So it means I have somebody who cleans my house really well. In actual fact, my friend, because you can make friends through this, who is my support worker as well, Annette, she brought me in here today. Yes, I could have come in on the train and fiddled around with the number 96 tram and all that, but it was just easy to come in with Annette because she helped me with makeup, hair and makeup. She's a lovely lady, and I'm so privileged to have her. And I think many of us are very, very privileged to have the NDIS because there's other things. You can, have equipment, you can have people to support you in many aspects and facets of your life. And I'm one of the privileged ones, and I feel as if life is good.
On that very positive note, Elise, thank you very much for
You're welcome.
being my guest today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Greer.
I'm Greer McGeary. My guest has been Elise Lonsdale. Thank you for watching.